Good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot. Welcome to this CASA and Gunner Shot webinar on India-China breakthrough. The India-China breakthrough is a momentous occasion, and I have with me a very eminent panel to discuss the, the complete complexity of this whole story. Let me first welcome everyone. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar once again. General Gautam Murthy, sir, Ambassador Trigunath, and Ambassador and General Bhatia. Great to see you here. Professor Kondapalli, I think, is stuck somewhere. He'll be joining us. Uh, without much ado, let me start the whole proceeding. We've had this talk between, you know, Xi Jinping and our Prime Minister Modi a few days back. And after that, we've had some action on ground as reported by the press, all that. But what we have to do is understand is this comes 7 years after Doklam, 4 years after Galwan, and 2 years after the Yangtze, where actually people had, hand to hand, I wouldn't say combat, but contact, definitely, right? And in all these 7 years, India-China relations were strained. And there was a perception that we had lost ground to Chinese in these areas. Uh, as it appears that as if we've going to get back the whole lot, which means, give or take a few points here and there, uh, Xi Jinping is going back to square one, virtually on ground from where he started, 7 years back. So what the whole story all about? But then, in this vitiated atmosphere between India and China, any small breakthrough is also big. There's no doubt, right? Uh, the breakthrough has happened. The details are hazy. There is action on grounds, but everyone is reporting it, but we don't know actually what it is because it's not put out in public sphere. Maybe for good reasons. Okay. Uh, the meet between Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping would, give a lot of jubilation to Russia, and it would have given a lot of heartburn and problems to USA, who would be thinking out of the, whole story, right? And then there's the whole angle of the China-India relations. Where will it go from here? I've been reading a few Chinese, news portals. One thing common which comes across both sides is there's a lot of mistrust on both sides, and the expectations are pretty low. Of course, from the Chinese side, one expectation which overrides everything is how fast will commerce between India and China normalize, right? And then, of course, there are issues of this whole story which is developing, or this whole relationship which is developing, which will impact our general foreign policy outlooks. It will, in some way or the other. It has effect on BRICS, Quad, Indo-Pacific, and then the competition in Asia and all that. There are diplomatic, political, and military angles to the whole affair. Right. Now, with this as a backdrop, we have a variety of experts with us. So what I would request all of you to do is speak from your expertise and what you feel about it, so that we get a variety of ideas from all three. And as the professor joins, we'll get his ideas also, and then we'll see where it goes. I'll first request General Gautam Murthy, sir, uh, uh, kindly take over, sir. All yours.
Thank you, General Shankar. Good evening to you and my fellow panelists, and good evening to your viewers. At the outset, you have to forgive me for sounding like a croaking frog because I've got a sore throat. But let me start off by first uh, felicitating General Vinod Bhatia and his brothers in arms, our infantry. Today is the Infantry Day. General Bhatia not only was our DGMO, but he was also DG Infantry. And if China has come to the table to discuss everything, it is thanks to the infantry that is spearheading the thrust of the Indian Army, whether it is along the line of control, Arunachal Pradesh, line, line of actual control, wherever it may be. And felicitations to you, sir, and your brothers in arms. On this particular day, we discuss as to why China, what has happened, how did this breakthrough get about? It has very significant implications for both nations and in a broader geopolitical landscape. Now, this will mark a very pivotal moment in our bilateral relations, and it has very potential long term effects. The basic issue that was bedeviling our relationship was, as we all know, that China just came for an exercise during COVID and then went ahead and occupied places where they did not permit us to patrol any further. Now we have reached a consensus to resume patrolling in the critical areas, and General Bhatia will speak about it, about them, the Depsang Plains, Demchok, which have been long-standing points of contention. Now, both sides have indicated that this development is a step forward to restoring the status quo ante. Prior to April 2020, our External Affairs Minister has reiterated it even very recently at the NDTV symposium that they had. The Indian Army and every GOC from that time onwards was very clear, and the army commanders and the chiefs, that we want a return to pre-2020 conditions. So, what is the first implication? First implication is that there is the danger of a military confrontation has been put aside. The LSA has seen several heightened tensions, also the McMahon line towards Arunachal, but now this will hopefully lead to a more stable border situation, which will allow for regular patrolling. Now they're looking at different models. General Bhatia will speak about it. The other thing which Ambassador Trigunayat will also speak about is that the diplomatic effort that has gone behind this, it has been huge. This agreement will pave the way for further discussions, and viewers must understand one aspect of it, that diplomacy is not simply issuing statements. There's a lot of background work to be done, as we say, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And this agreement will pave the way for further discussions and various other summits that will be coming up. Political dialogue will increase apart from what the diplomats are doing. Political dialogue at the level of the Prime Minister, at the level of various ministers, for trade, for commerce, and even going into other areas, primarily the economy. This will increase. We have seen that political engagement between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Mr. President Xi Jinping, which was very frequent prior to Galwan and now after the recent meeting when they met after almost 6, 7 years, there is a hope that these meetings will continue further. The other resumption of talks, again, Ambassador Trigunayat will speak about, is about the special representatives from both countries, which aim basically to develop a long-term strategy for managing not only the border, but enhancing our strategic communication. Therefore, and with China, Ambassador will bear me out, you have to have a structured approach. And point by point, because every word is given its weightage. Military strategy, both countries will assess and reassess their deployments. India had increased the troop deployment, and we had indicated a serious strategic shift to make it more robust. Will this continue? General Bhatia will throw some light on it. Economic implications, trade relations, they're bound to see a thaw. There are many commentaries which are saying that this came about as a push because India would also stand to lose in case the ties take a further hit, but we will benefit mutually from trade, with China becoming India's largest trading partner. Improved relationship will lead to increased business engagements, direct flights, resumption of visa services, so on and so forth. Investment opportunities, we know that there are certain strictures that have been passed and certain um embargoes the government has put on doing business with China, especially Chinese investment. But perhaps this could increase this going forward. About strategic realignment, General Shankar had mentioned, of course, this that now basically between India and China, improved relations will alter our dynamics, particularly with the United States, as it will not view this India as a counterbalancing force as it viewed it earlier. A thaw in our relationships will certainly complicate our strategy going with the United States. And India is growing assertive on the global stage. Everybody is seeing it. So we are likely to see a shift here. And in far as there will be a more balanced approach, according to most commentators, about our relationship with the US as with China. As far as regional stability is concerned, this will contribute positively to regional peace and security. And this is essential in the broader geopolitical context. However, there are challenges ahead. Firstly, is the trust deficit. Despite the positive development, there's been a significant trust deficit that remains between India and China. Indians have been bitten, and as they say, once bitten, twice shy. We have to be careful, trust, verify, but we have to continue to verify because any negative move can set this process back to where it was initially. And military issues, it does not resolve the broader territorial claims, but at least the old agreement of peace and tranquility. Maybe we revert back to that more by my panelists as we go along. And finally, I would like to say that it is a crucial step in reduction of tensions, and it is good for both diplomatic relations, regional stability, good for the soldiers who are deployed on the border. We have to look at it from their point of view also, that they're not in confrontation at those icy heights. So, all in all, I'll say that this will continuation of this will depend on sustained diplomatic efforts, economic cooperation, and the ability to manage our unresolved disputes very effectively with regular border meetings, so on and so forth. This is all that I have to say. Back to you, General Shankar. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for your intervention. I'd like to second your thoughts on our infantry before I talk of anything else. We have the best infantry in the world, and all of us are proud of it because at every point of time, they've kept the flag of the nation up and about. Okay. And you made a couple of significant points. This is a pivotal moment in not only China-India relations, I think even in global relations. Because there's a slight shift which has happened with this just meeting. It gives a new opportunity to everyone. It also shows a new set of challenges to everyone. So there is a realignment which takes place. Even for India, it creates a lot of leverages. As much as it creates a lot of leverages, there are a lot of pitfalls also which are ahead, which we need to be cognizant of, right? And of course, the a point which I'd like to highlight, and I'm sure it'll keep coming back again and again, is that there's no way of that we'll go back to pre-20 days as in the LAC. The LAC could go back to pre-2020 days, but the relationship will not go back because this is a new relationship in this intervening 7 years. I'm talking of 7 years from Doklam to now. And maybe General Bhatia will say, no, this is not 7 years. This was coming for the past 1 decade. Uh, right? Our relationship is changed because India has changed in these 10 years, and so has China, right? In my way of thinking, India has risen, and China has, gone past its peak, and it's now declining. And we can have a debate on that whether it's declining or not, but it's not definitely rising anymore, right? And of course, reduction of forces and all that. I think it's a little too premature to talk about it because, uh, you know, there are indications which I want to highlight of a bit of a rift between PLA and the political hierarchy at the in China. And the political situation in China, I'm sure Professor Kondapalli will bring it out, is not that stable. And it is history that PLA, and when PLA and the political hierarchy are not on one page, things could happen. So that danger still exists. I'll not say more. I'll now request Ambassador Tribunal, sir, your views, and you flow the way you want to, you view it and where you see it going. All yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I feel that Galwan was good for us. It was a wake-up call, as we couldn't have been just wading through the kind of changes that were taking place. So, in a way, it is a good thing. So, let's begin from there. It has been 4 years and 7 years, as you mentioned, since Doklam, and even before. But at the same time, as you know, the two large neighbors whose trajectory tends to define the global south as well as the global geopolitics. And when they are at odds, it is definitely a bit difficult thing. And there are many factors that have happened. But you know that I must compliment, in fact, our military and diplomacy, both, for these 55 odd meetings that took place. And it was consistent for last 4 years. So it was also a culmination of India's continued policy that we have been propagating everywhere, be it Russia-Ukraine war, be it the other wars in the Middle East and elsewhere, that dialogue and diplomacy can only bring about peace. So the fundamental dimension of that is India has proved by continuing to engage with China, although often we have said that business as usual cannot go on. Ironically, the business has grown, but the business in the political sense, the relationship has been at its lowest. Although Prime Minister Modi, I think this is his 21st meeting, if I'm not wrong, with President Xi Jinping. The last one really was at Johannesburg at the BRICS summit when China did eventually agree to support India's G20 presidency. So there have been indicators that have been coming. But as you mentioned, perhaps there is a problem between the PLA and, of course, the LAC is a fluid state. So there are going to be issues. So that's why during this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, on the sidelines of this BRICS summit in Kazan, it was virtually a given that every effort will be made to have this meeting happen now. And Russians have been, as you know, been propagating RIC, in which I was there in 2000s, and at that time, Primakov had started this. And since then, we've been meeting, then BRICS came about, and since then, we have been Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and all these organizations, we are there. But we are also there as sort of different poles within these groupings, representing different things while agreeing on certain regional dimensions. But bilaterally, there has always been a certain sense of competition, and that has gone on. Now here, this is something, as you know, that till today we are talking about whether, and Prime Minister Modi was very clear, and he mentioned that I'm happy to see you and meet you, and that we need to work together on this. And they both, the special representatives, the NSA level, have been tasked to restart the talks on the border. Because see, the LAC is the dragon in the room. So whether we like it or not, we have to resolve it. The border issue has to be resolved. Right now, this will be the north and south, which will have Depsang and Demchok. They will be resolved. There will be patrolling points agreed to by both sides. Everything may perhaps go back to pre-2020. This may come back. What happens to so much of infrastructure that has been created by the Chinese? So, but Chinese do understand that they are not looking at a military confrontation with India in the near future, because the Chinese game plan is essentially to dislodge United States from its numero uno position. That's it. So any war in between is going to stymie that effort. So that's there. On the other hand, we must also not forget, while these efforts for normalizing ties are going to be there, number one, the China is going to be our challenge in every geography, more so in South Asia and West Asia. These are the two places in Africa also that we need to be very careful. Secondly, in Asia, China still believes in a unipolar Asia. Whatever it may say at the BRICS or anywhere else, that there is enough space for two of us to be there, but that's what they want. And globally, they are looking for a bipolar world order. So we have to begin with that premise and always keep in our mind that this is something that will happen. Now, another thing is that why it actually happened. The peace and tranquility is always a desirable objective among neighbors, and the issues must be resolved through dialogue, which we have been doing it. Both are ambitious countries, aspirational powers, wanting to go have a regional and global influence. So that's a given for both of us, are growing much faster pace. And India is much faster pace growing, but China is also, I mean, we might agree or disagree on the pace of the reforms, the problems that they are facing. But the structural issues between the two countries also exist and continue to exist. One more thing which is very important is, since the economic engagement with China has continued to grow in the past, despite several efforts that India tried to make, once again, we are witnessing that the Indian companies have begun to exert pressure that we need to be more focused on enhancing ties until such time that we have developed our own competencies and capabilities, whether it's Atmanirbhar or otherwise, whichever way. And thirdly, of course, the geopolitical dimension is increasing. Why China is keen to do that, that's also very important. You see, the Chinese are very smart, and those people who say that everybody is moving out of China, all these companies, China plus one model, this and that. If you go to Vietnam, you will see Chinese companies or Chinese government have invested a great deal in Vietnam. So their global value supply chains go on from there. On the other hand, they see that India, which is trying to follow as a strategic autonomy with a close partnership with the West, and if they invest here and things move out of here to the country, so they continue to retain their primacy in the global value supply chains. So this is also something that I think that we will have to factor in whichever way we would like to have a look. Now, I think the others will be able to throw more light on actual physical boundaries, what will happen, what will not happen. I personally believe that these confidence-building measures are essential. We also need to buy peace. It's very important. Let's look at it this way. Be very realistic in this term rather than giving gaudy objectives, because we have a lot to gain, because there is an asymmetry. This current asymmetry between China and India needs to be bridged somehow, and we'll have to work much faster, much power, and we also need a peace on our borders for that purpose. So I would say that we must probably put in 4 P's, as I just thought of. One is power, very important to have a comprehensive power, economic and military power, to be able to to defend yourself in the first place and to exert your influence as the next. Then you need to have patience. Strategic patience with the Chinese, I think, is very much necessary. And PELF, you have to be a rich country with a checkbook diplomacy. And that is going to be the reality going forward in whichever geography in the developing world we are going to be, whether the voice of Global South. Without that checkbook diplomacy, it will find a problem. And then only last P, that is peace, to some extent can be achieved. I'll stop here, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I think you made some very, very important points. I'd like to highlight those which you have made. Important thing, Galwan was good for the nation. It took the nation up. If Galwan had not happened, and this is what many times General Bhatia and I have discussed, we wouldn't have been in this kind of a bargaining position also. It revolutionized India. India has a history of, losing on table what we've won on ground. But this time we see this flip, which is a very good thing, which very few people have thought. But as you spoke, Ambassador, it came to me that for the first time, what we are doing on ground and what we have done on the table, diplomatically, economically, and politically, has been absolutely good, and we are coming to some conclusion. And I only hope we convert it back on ground. What everything else. I mean, because it's a thing which is still in motion. Uh, yeah, because everything has to be still settled on ground. Uh, you also spoke that China has a larger aim of, a unipolar Asia and a bipolar world. In this question, I think India has to decide what is its aim. What is India's aim? When China is very clear for the past 10 years, it's been, or more, it's been putting out this aim. But what is India's aim is something which we have to think of. We spoke of trade. Whereas trade has been increasing, the trade deficit has also increased. So that this one-sided trade, I'm afraid, is not the way to go forward. So we have to think out of the thing, because I see a lot of greedy businessmen who are just in it for the whole to make a fast buck. But I think there is a requirement for the government to sit down and think it through, so that any trade or investment from China has value to us, and we don't become another Vietnam. Because you cannot be another Vietnam, and of course the trade deficit has to reduce. You made an important point of buying peace, right? You have to buy your peace. For that, you have to give something. So that's something which is important. And of the last 4.4 P's which you said, power, patience, wealth, and peace, I think is very significant. And I'm sure General Bhatia will talk of 4 Ds. 4 Ds and 4 Ps should come out in this discussion, the way I look at it. Uh, Thanks a lot, sir. With this, I'd request General Bhatia. I'll call Professor Kondapalli at the end, because then we'll give him a chance to observe what he's missed out on. General Bhatia, sir, all yours.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be, an education also, to be on the platform of CASA and Colonel Shot. And today's Infantry Day, thank you for the wishes. And I salute all the infantrymen. Indian infantry, Indian Army is by far the most combat-rich, battle-hardened army and infantry in the world. Salute to the soldiers, please. It's very interesting listening to Ambassador Trignet and, of course, the General Gautam Murthy and General P.I. Shankar. Let me start by saying that you point the right word, breakthrough. A lot of people are talking about agreements. I don't think there's an agreement. There's a breakthrough, basically. And this breakthrough is a win-win situation both for India and China. Somehow we are touting as a victory for India. I think China needs it as much as India needs it, if not more. It is not that China does not need peace and tranquility along the line of actual control for the present. I'm not talking always. I'm talking for the present. Because come 2020 and what China did was a strategic intent. It demonstrated strategic intent. And it has always been doing that. The Chinese strategy, we have to understand, has always been first claim, which is claimed since 1959, thereafter occupy, thereafter legitimize, and then integrate. So that's what China has been doing. That's the Chinese strategy. If you see, everywhere China has done that. And whether it's Tibet, Taiwan, not Taiwan, Turkmenistan, or Outer Mongolia. And this is what exactly it wanted to do out here. But it did not appreciate a strategic resolve by India to defend its territorial integrity. And that is where I think we should see where all elements of national power, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, have been synergized, and the political have synergized. And we have stood that, the last man standing has given us the power to deal with China from a position of relative strength. The asymmetry exists, but there's a position of relative strength. And that is why through political dialogue, through diplomatic dialogue, WMCC, through a military dialogue, 4-point level talks, through commerce and trade, we've been able to pressurize China to vacate areas which it had occupied, which it has not done anywhere else other than 1979. And China, of course, believes in teaching lessons and doing a lot of other things. Having said that, let me also say that it is not the end, it is only the beginning. to say that China has gone back and it will not happen again, I don't subscribe to that. We should not even talk about trust deficit, because we should only trust ourselves. We should not trust anyone else. We face it a bit too often, and we should not trust anyone. We trust our own self and trust our own capabilities. And here I fully endorse what Ambassador Trivedi has said. One, I thank China, and we've spoken about it earlier, for Galwan. And two, we got to purchase peace through preparedness. We got to be willing to spend monies. We have to reduce asymmetries. We cannot asymmetries will exist, but then we'll have to do certain things to ensure that the asymmetric differential, or the military differential, the economic differential is reduced, the asymmetry is reduced, so that we can face up to China. And the threat has not gone anywhere. Threat has always been there. It continued to be there. And China, as it challenges the US, it needed India on its side. If not India on its side, needed neutral India, and that's what it's exactly done. So, and we should not give too much of a credit that that India has done something. China was looking for a face-saving exit, which it has got. So, it has got a face-saving exit, and rightly so. It has gone back, and it's okay with us. We are fine with it. Absolutely, territorial integrity, strategic autonomy is a core national interest, and that is where we are. Now, if you look a little further, if China, it had opened too many fronts. It is the Taiwan front, South China Sea, the East Sea, because Japan too is materializing, Korea, and India-China border. The 5 flashpoints, major flashpoints of conflict in the world, had a China connect, right? So we should also understand what China is looking at. Understanding China, I think Professor Kondapalli will be more this thing. We need to understand China, and we should look at China from the Indian perspective rather than always reading the Western perspective of China and understanding China on that way. So understanding China, I think, is exceedingly important, and that is what we will do. Now, a little way forward. The way forward, like you rightly said, I will repeat myself, the 4 Ds, in addition to the 4 Ps. The 4 Ds being defend line of action control, because that is the start point. Dominate the sea lines of communication, because that is the vulnerability, China's strategic vulnerability, strategic concerns. And depth diplomacy to bind to balance with nations where we have convergence and forms of interest, Quad and other multipolar forums, multilateral forums. And 4th D, of course, is the deny China space in the neighborhood, which really is something of a challenge right now, because China has got the a fat checkbook, and it believes in not only world diplomacy, but it also believes in debt traps and all. So that's what it's doing. And India soft power will definitely, I think, in the long run, win over China's sharp power. So that is where we should be looking at. Now, coming down to when there's a purchase peace through preparedness, let me take a few minutes on that. Militarily, it's very important, and I'll cover the military part of it. What has actually happened is that China and Dipsang, as I see it, and I may be wrong, and it is happening for a decade now. It started on 14th April 2013, when the first came, 19.5 kilometers occupied the bottleneck at Lakhi Nala, which they've done again. And that denies us easy access. I don't say it denies access. It denies us a logical, easy, optimal access to the Dipsang plains, and to especially patrol point 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Because coming from north is difficult, coming from Jivanala is difficult, so that is what it is. So now that they are moving back from here, I think the way forward is that the two sides, that is the PLA and the Indian Army, will lay down the periodicity, the frequency, and the strength of patrols. And it will be so laid down that they start dismantling. The satellite is very clear that they start dismantling certain quasi-permanent structures they created. But the challenge also remains, because they have a track coming from Chipchap right up to Bottleneck, and Burtse, which is much nearer, but we don't have a road access to Bottleneck and beyond. So that is something which we'll have to do. So what we need to continue to do is, and thanking China again, once again, continue to build infrastructure. Because something we've been lagging behind is infrastructure. China, on the other hand, has a multimodal infrastructure, state-of-the-art infrastructure, and it's got a logistics infrastructure of sustaining 3.6 lakh tons of logistics within the border areas of the land. Right? In our case, we need to build infrastructure, and we want to build logistics, because logistics gives us flexibility. We have certain terrain advantages we should optimize, China has to bring everything from the mainland to some kilometers away. We are much nearer, but then we also have terrain fractured sectors. So what we need to do is keep reserves, keep contingencies, and we need QRF. We have strategic mobility, but we have to enhance our operational mobility, our tactical mobility, and our battlefield mobility. Because mobility is very important, especially in the mountains. Whether it is your invest in capability development, capability building, capacity enhancement, because China respects strength, and we should deal with China from a position of relative strength. So we will look at that. But there's one structural fault I think we should look at, and let me say it, or we should also understand our weaknesses. There's structural systematic fault in our manning the land actuator, and that is we got two forces: the army and the ITBP. And ITBP comes to the Ministry of Home Affairs, and we sometimes do pass conflicting instructions either through the ministries or through intermediate headquarters. As for the group of ministers report post Kargil Review Committee, para 5.2 was categorical. It said that all border guarding forces, single border guarding force, and the contested or the unsettled borders should be manned by the army, that is the LC and the LAC. However, ITBP is not under operational control of the army, and I think this correction we should do. Well, it's okay to come up and say everything is very fine. No, things have to improve. We have to look forward, and if we do not look forward, again we'll find mounting. The next thing I think we really need to synergize, and we should understand that I'm giving out the weaknesses, is the ISR, the intelligence, surveillance, and defenses. We have to synthesize the strategic intelligence, the operational intelligence, and tactical intelligence. We were taken by surprise in 2020, which should never happen again. We cannot be taken by surprise. So what we need to do is continue to enhance our ISR capabilities, infrastructure, ensure that we man the LAC as we will manning, and as per the new whatever agreements come to, protocols are there. Trust your own capabilities and ensure reserves with adequate mobility to shift them and have your contingencies ready. So this is something which I will stop. But we should also, one more last caution I will say, we should understand China's capabilities. And China's capability in the multi-domain warfare. They talk of the Great Wall, and fortunately they talk a lot and do little sometimes. They talk of the Great Wall of snow, of sand, of surface, of sea, of subsurface, of space, and cyber. Right? They talk of the Great Wall. And they also talk of the Great Wall of villages. They have constructed these villages and they're populating them. And we also have a vibrant village project, but we need to invest more in the vibrant village project. We still have something known as the inner line permit for visiting our border areas. I see no reason why we should have inner line permits, at least for Indian nationals. We should open it up and we should invest in the people of our border areas. And we should not only look at Eastern Ladakh, our focus is totally diverted to Eastern Ladakh in the media and other things. But we should also be aware that there can be a crisis in Dolam, in Sikkim, and basically in Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh, whether it's fishtails or with other areas. So we should be looking at our capabilities all along the 3, 4, 8 kilometers of India-China border. It is not only Eastern Ladakh, it is not only Devsuk, it's only Demchok, but it is all right from Karakoram to Kibutu. And that is what our focus should be, and not get taken by surprise in any other place, because that is not acceptable actually. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir. I thought you covered some really good points, which we've been discussing. You put them very succinctly. I'll speak of the asymmetry a little later. But what the main thing which you brought out of 4Ds, defend the LAC, dominate the maritime space because they are connected. Uh, Diplomacy, multilateral diplomacy with everyone in multilateral organization, and deny space in the neighborhood. I think these four plus the 4 Ps which the ambassador has said will serve the nation quite a bit. Uh, yeah, the common point of purchasing peace through preparedness. You need to buy your peace. right? It's not only dealing with China, you need to prepare for it and this thing. And like you rightly said, I think China had opened too many fronts. And one of the reasons why he is given ceded ground here is to keep his strategic intent and keep his larger aim in mind. And that is this face-saving exit which he's created for himself to do this. Because now he's selling it to his people that look, we are getting out because we have the larger aim and we don't want to be, we want to keep our focus on the West and on USA and things like that. And we need India on our side. And this is what the sense I get when I read the Chinese media. Okay. Uh, I think it's very important that the ambassador spoke about the asymmetry, and you spoke about though there is asymmetry, we can speak to them from a position of strength on ground. And that I think is what has seen us through. Because you could have all kinds of strength, but on ground you need to have the strength to overcome that, that the best infantryman in the world, which China has not been able to do. And that's why it has, stuck where it is. And you have been to the Y Junction and Jivanala and all those places. It is not as if those were complete obstacles where we couldn't go ahead at all. I would like to explain this to everyone. You could circumvent all of them in a set of circumstances. They were not complete blockades. Only thing is, if you did that, it was escalation. And that is what India didn't want to do. It is not that as if India didn't have the capability of, outflanking them or outmaneuvering them. And then the issue is, how do you reduce this asymmetry? You reduce it through better preparedness by, better ISR, better logistics, better approach to multi-domain war, and to increase your mobility. I think the very deep things. I'm virtually reiterating what you have said. And I think everyone has to understand. And the most important point made between the ambassador and General Bhatia is that asymmetry can be handled. And that is something which people have to understand. We've handled it. While there is asymmetry, you have to start living with it and handle it. Right. With this, I'd request Professor Kondapalli, sir, all yours. Please carry on.
Thank you very much, General Shankar. Good evening to the fellow panelists. Good evening to the audience as well. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to interact. Well, the sequence of events have all been mentioned by the previous speakers, and also what India needs to do in this regard. Since Foreign Secretary Mr. Vikram Misri made that statement on October 21st, followed by External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar's statement on disengagement process and going back to March 2020 positions. And then on 23rd October, the Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping meeting in Kazan on the agreement related to the patrolling and others. They also mentioned about the SR talks to be resumed in the process. So the Chinese military, their websites, etc., they have not spoken much about it. In fact, they were citing Foreign Secretary Mr. Misri's statements, and also the BBC and others who carried all this information. Generally, the Weibo and WeChat discussions, they have been very negative coverage on India, expressing suspicion of the deal and also putting several questions on the current round of patrolling access being given to the Indian side in Depsang and Demchok. So this is quite stark in the Chinese social media. Official media has only cited the foreign ministry spokesperson's comments about resolving the relevant issues. They did not mention much about the border as such and the main arrangements that are being made for patrolling and other details in these two areas. They did cite the WMCC meeting in August this year. Also, the Corps Commander level meeting in February, that was also part of the discussion. And they cited, the Chinese cited Dr. Jaishankar's meeting with Mr. Wang Yi in Astana and Vientiane, and also National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval's meeting with Wang Yi in Russia. So these were mentioned, but there is no fresh insight in terms of what exactly is going to happen in the Ladakh, Aksai Chin region in terms of the arrangements that are announced. Indian side actually has more information regarding this, and also the dates for patrolling resumption and others. So it appeared to be a kind of stunned silence on the part of the Chinese media, but we have been agog about the situation that is evolving on the border. So this disparity we can see in terms of the Chinese coverage, including the military blocks and the Indian side, where you have all across the social media, the coverage is very intensive in India. So you see this asymmetry, not just asymmetry of power, but also asymmetry of narrative war. And the higher ground that the Indian side occupies in terms of the situation on the border and the preparations being made. It appears to be more Indian initiatives rather than China. Of course, that is not true, because both hands have to meet and a final outcome is to be looked at. So from the point of view of coverage, we see a lot of Indians have covered this. Not so much very bland statements in the social networking sites in China. That is quite visible in this. So they did mention, of course, about the 4.5 years of armed stalemate on the border. The kind of escalation that has been made by the forces on the border at the petrol points, which are under the control of the Chinese in Depsang Plains and Demchok. But there is also no mention about the buffer zones and what does that mean for the local dynamics. So there is some did mention that this is a positive development. Some mentioned that this is also a kind of united front against the United States. There was a commentary in a PLA daily about some time ago, not immediately now, but mentioning about the India should distance from the US. And so there is also that angle, foreign policy angle, and United States specifically on the Quad. And there is a more specific comment by the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson on the US State Department announcement on Arunachal Pradesh as part of India. I think that was quite stark in recent times. But the US factor has been highlighted in many of the commentaries in the blogs. So that is a... there is also a mention quietly in some social networking sites that what China is doing is currently only tactical move. And the pressures of Taiwan, South China Sea, Senkaku Islands, and other fronts with the United States were one of the main reasons for China, in addition to, of course, the economic factors.
Looks like China.
The
Yeah, please go
issues
ahead.
related to so the issues related to the problems that the PLA is facing in Western Theater Command. There was a mention about some 58 casualties on the Chinese side since Galwan began, not those in the June 15th night, but subsequently because of the lack of oxygen and other. So this has been one of the features of the kind of assessment that was made by the Chinese side, and also the issues in relation to the agreement as such. While there is no joint declaration, joint statement in this regard, and this appears to be part of the Chinese pressure not to conclude any major agreement, explicit agreement on this, documentation, so on and so forth, but leave it at the local level and see how situation evolves. But the pressure on economic downturn, the other fronts that China has, is quite visible in the Chinese, references to the Galwan-related, arrangements now, last 4 or 5 days. So this is one key feature. There is a mention about the economic aspect, trade, and so on and so forth in the social networking sites. There was a comment by Wang Dehua, who was one of the doyens of China-India relations. He is pretty senior in terms of the scholarship, etc. He said that if India has to rise, it has to take assistance from China in terms of investments, trade, and so on and so forth. So this is quite a stark comment that came about. When we actually look at the brass tacks, the total Chinese investments in India is no more than $8 billion cumulatively last 20-25 years. For an economy which is around $18 trillion, $8 billion is quite a surprise amount. Also, in terms of the Chinese participation in the infrastructure projects, which is quite minimal. Even before those restrictions were placed, the April 2020 press note 3, which had mentioned about the restrictions on investment. Even before that, the Chinese total investments have been very minimal. Even though President Xi Jinping, when he visited India in September 2014, he said they will invest about $100 billion with a manufacturing center in Pune and in Ahmedabad. But none of these materialized. As I mentioned before, only $8 billion has been the total investment. The other pressure that China is facing is the EV sector, electronic vehicle sector, which they want to kind of pressurize India to admit to the flow, because they are facing a lot of problems in the automobile sector. The conventional vehicles, petrol, diesel, etc., they most of these automobiles have been shut down because of the competition from the EV sector, and because of the European Union US tariffs, which are nearly about 100%. And we had about 18% tariffs so far on the Chinese EV sector. So comparatively better position in relation to India. And there is a serious discussion in China on the EV exports to India. So this is seen as the one of the major compromises that China may have made in post-Galwan related events. It is too early to say about the 30 engagement dialogues we have with China. There is a foreign secretary level strategic dialogue. 8 or 9 of these were conducted. There is an annual defense dialogue since Mr. Pranab Mukherjee initiated in 2006 as the defense minister at that time. There is also the Niti Aayog NDRC um, macroeconomic dialogue that has also been stalled. There was youth dialogue. There is think tank to think tank media dialogue, museums exchange of information, etc. So totally about 30 dialogue processes exist between China and India. All of these have been shut down due to Galwan. So there was some debate in terms of when these will be resumed. And also, as other speakers have mentioned, Jan Murthy mentioned about the direct flights and visa restrictions. In fact, last 3-4 months, there has been a certain campaign from the Chinese side on the visas and also on the direct flights and so on. So this may be too early at this moment because of we need to see what the progress is in terms of resuming patrols and other details on peace and tranquility on the border. So it's too early to say because the Chinese have hardly given away their views regarding the last 4 or 5 days of dynamics that have been unfolding. So we should hold our houses back. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. I think you also made some very interesting points, a different set of points, if I may say. An important thing which you said is relatively there's more chatter on our side and less on theirs. And for some reason, even there's been no internal talk within China about what this deal is all about. And that has probably given some space for unnecessary chatter going about. But their think tanks are coming out with in different directions. But if you see their BRICS, talks of BRICS, indirectly they have said, look, it's good to do this deal with India because then it gives us leverage in BRICS. And BRICS, my sense is that they're betting big on BRICS to take them to that position all over the world. Okay. Now, you also spoke of asymmetry of narrative, which is going on in this kind of a case. I think that's a very important issue. As far as the casualties are concerned, I think it's a very important issue that we understand that what the professor said, that the Chinese have been suffering a lot of casualties in Eastern Ladakh. And that has its own effect on morale and the effect back home, right? And we don't know about it because the figures are vary. The professor says 58 since Galwan, but there are also figures which say 55 in the past 12 months. The truth might be somewhere in between, but the fact is that they've had casualties, and that tells on polity quite a bit. Okay. Uh, as far as investments are concerned, I'd like to clarify. There was a report in South China Morning Post where they had quoted their relevant ministry, which had given instructions to people not to invest in Turkey and India. I've read this post. Okay, so there is the official edict within the within China. Of course, this came about 2 weeks back of not investing in Turkey and India at this point of time. So I don't know whether investment will start immediately. Like what the professor said, the issue is at this point of time, how do you resume dialogue? How do you resume direct flights? How do you resume those visa restrictions and things like that? Only when you get these small things that you can think of a bigger thing called investment. Right. Like all have said, there's a lot of fluidity still left. We have to understand, we're just about 6 days since the meeting has taken place, and some kind of arrangement has been brought about. It is still an arrangement. It's not a settlement. It's not a pact. We still have to talk of the border, and this is just restoring status quo ante 2020. Okay, it's not, it's just one small step. It's a big step. We need to discuss, Unless we discuss, we will also not get clarity as to how to go ahead. I'll not have a second round, but I'll take a few questions